and welcome to this episode of the DC Life Podcast. Today, we're going to chat with someone about something in the life of our church.
Hello, I'm Greg Gardner. Welcome to this edition of the DC Life Podcast. Today, I'm talking to Pastor Anthony Sliger, and we're going to be chatting about a resource that gets quite a lot of use around Disciples Church, and that's a resource that's called How People Change. Sly, g'day.
Hello, Greg. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, thank
Good.
you. Well, as I said, we use this resource around Disciples Church fairly extensively. In fact, we've done so for years.
Yeah.
And
Almost from the beginning.
yeah, pretty close, hey? Yeah. So a lot of people will have some familiarity with it,
Definitely.
been through it at least once, but hopefully even more times than that. So I suppose the first question is this: why is it such a key resource for us?
Yeah. I think as we kind of came across it, it's funny, I remember when Beck and I did a trip to the States back in, I think that was 2011, like really early days of DC and looking around. We caught up with this guy in California, and he asked us about this, this resource, How People Change, and did we know about it? And we were kind of like, nope, no idea. And it kind of breezed over a little bit. But as we he kind of gave us a little explanation of it, and we're like, oh yeah, that sounds good, but didn't kind of hit home. But I remember afterwards, and maybe even after we looked at it for the first time, that I'd had a previous conversation with someone back in 2007, and them just saying that they thought this was one of the best resources they'd ever come across to help people apply the gospel into their own life in the midst of ordinary, everyday situations, and just understand that the gospel actually has transformative power in the here and now for our lives and how we operate in the midst of ordinary stuff. And so I can't even remember exactly how we came across it, but it was pretty early on. Do you remember?
I remember. I asked. It was my last year at Bible College, and I sought out a guy by the name of David Cunningham, who's an American guy who was in Australia, and he planted Christ Community Church. That's now at Toowong in Brisbane.
Yep.
These days, David's back pastoring in the United States. But he planted this church, and it seemed fairly successful. And so I sought him out, and I said, "Can you meet with me every month? I'll just pick your brains."
It's like coaching.
Yeah, exactly. And so I met up with him, and one month I just said to him, "Give me the most useful, life-changing book that you've read." And he didn't even hesitate. He didn't. He didn't have to think about it for very long. He just said, "Oh, that's easy. Instruments in the Redeemer's Hands" by Paul Tripp. And he said it to me like I should have known what that was.
Yeah, okay.
But I'd never heard of either the book or Paul Tripp at that point. And he expressed some surprise and ordered me to go home and buy the book and read it straight away. So that was my first experience of Paul Tripp, reading that particular book. But as Paul often says in the books that he writes these days, there's nothing new or different.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of stuff, just reworked in a different way. And so moving from the Instruments book to the How People Change resource, which is written by him and Tim Lane, it just seemed to sort of package that all together. And so as we were doing that, and you're getting that input from the States, and then all of a sudden this resource was made known to us, I think it was then that we thought, well, let's try it in core group and see how it goes. And I look back on that and I think, oh, we probably did it all wrong, but at least it exposed us to it, and it gave us a taste of what might happen. So for those who've never done How People Change, and really I think the name of it should be How the Gospel Changes People, or How Jesus Changes People. But anyway, what's the big idea of it? What's the overall snapshot that you can give us?
Yeah, so like I said, it's it's basically to help you apply the gospel into your life in ordinary life, and so in ordinary everyday stuff. So on the last page of the book that we hand out to people, there's a summary picture of kind of the course overlay that you work through, and we often refer to it as the 3-tree diagram.
Yes.
And so there's this idea that you, when you're impacted or affected by situations in your life, that is heat, and that is referred to. And then you have, so whatever the situation is, whether it's a blessing or a trial, you have opportunity to respond to it in one or two ways. You can respond to it in a fruitful way, is the term that they use, which basically means responding to it in a way that honours the Lord and glorifies Him. Or you can respond in a thorny way or a bad fruit way, which is basically having a negative response to something. And if you have that negative response, the only way for it to be transformed in a lasting, true way is for it to move through the heart and through the cross, and have a gospel lens, a gospel awareness, a gospel application put to that negative response, so that it can be transformed into one that honours the Lord. And so HPC is basically working through that. After a couple of intro sessions anyway, they're working out through that diagram in detail, and you kind of get to practice it, doing a little bit at a time each week. But the big idea is that it's not just meant to be something that you kind of work through once as a course, but there's actually a tool to put in your gospel tool belt, so that you can use it regularly when heat, whatever it is, blessing or burden, comes up in your life, to help you kind of understand your own heart in a self-awareness way, and a gospel application way. Like when Jesus, speaks about our heart, he says it's an overflow of out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so the idea is that whatever is going on in our inside is what's going to come out to our mouth. So if that's a negative response, then we actually need the gospel working more deeply in that area, whatever it is, to cause us to be transformed by the Holy Spirit working in us, and Christ's mighty power to allow us to glorify Him more.
One of the great illustrations they use in the course is the like a dashboard on a car, and then the car engine. Like if you've got a light or the little dial is getting a bit too close to hot or something on your dashboard. Well, the way to fix that isn't to smash your dashboard and just push the dial back. What the dial is indicating is that there's something wrong under the hood. There's something wrong in the engine. And our behaviour is like that. If we've got a poor response to some event or a relational, some conversation you might have just had with somebody, if your response to that is poor, well, that's indicating that there's something going on at a heart level that's not allowing you to respond, as you said, in that fruitful way. So, and there's a bunch of illustrations like that in the course, isn't there? And
totally. I thought you were going to go to another one straight away. So
for the sake of time, but as you said, Jesus spoke, I think it was Luke 6, about, our heart being, and I think this is Tripp's description, the causal core of you, and
that's right.
And so if you can get into that area of your life and understand, well, this is what drives me. What's going on in my heart is what's driving me.
Yeah.
Therefore, if I'm going to allow that kind of gospel-centered change to happen, then I need to be dealing with myself at a heart level, not just putting Band-Aids on my behaviour.
I think that's one of the beautiful things that this does is it's not just a behaviour modification plan. It's talking about the heart being transformed by Jesus. And that happens. The analogy that Jesus uses of the fruit, a good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. Whatever comes out is evidence of what's going on beneath the surface, and that's the analogy that they kind of use. If you want an apple tree, you can't just take all the oranges off an orange tree and then stick apples on, because the next season it's going to produce oranges again.
That's right.
And so if your life's producing thorns, if you're having sinful responses to whatever the situation is in your life, that actually needs to be transformed, not just at a behavior level, but at a heart level.
Yeah.
And I think that's often what we've missed when it comes to, the church at large for a long time, that we think, the behavior on the surface is okay, or that's the perception that the world can have of us, isn't it? That,
Sure.
that we're just doing the right thing, even though our, underneath it's the same as everyone else. We're just covering up. But the reality is that a life that is surrendered to Jesus, a life that is being transformed by the Holy Spirit, the desires change, the drives and the motivators change. And so that heart level change happens on the deepest level of your inner person. And so old behaviors, old habit patterns, old sinful ways that you had just fade into the background because you don't even want them anymore, because you're so different, because Jesus has made you so different.
Yeah.
More like him.
Yeah. What I love about that is that it takes sanctification from being this kind of airy-fairy out there idea that nobody really understands, and it just puts some legs to it. It sort of it grabs hold of that and says, okay, tangibly, this is now how you can follow Jesus and allow him to transform your life and how you approach everything. You know. So it's that's really cool. So we've got there's 12 lessons. Although I sometimes do 13. Like
I was going to say we often do 14.
I do, yeah, because just to get it really rounded out and finished off. So
there's an intro and a conclusion which can kind of fill in a whole time, so an evening by themselves.
It's a decent level of time commitment, and it involves homework as well, doesn't it?
That's right. It does. Yes. So as I mentioned before, there's kind of a handful of intro lessons that kind of set it up. So the first 4 lessons after the introduction, so you could be 5 weeks in before you kind of get into the tree diagram.
These are really important though, Sly. Let's not brush over them.
No,
I mean,
totally.
I think if you don't get these at a foundational level, then some of the other stuff just becomes formulaic.
100%.
You know, you're like, I move from A to, like running around a baseball circuit.
Mm-hmm.
I go from base 1, 2, 3, and I come back. But if you really need that foundation, so the first one is this idea of understanding that God wants you to be holy. There's a destination in mind. He's not just leaving you. Like God chases us down and He saves us where we're at. He gets into the mud where we are. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to leave us there, right?
That's right.
So. Am I right? Is that the first one?
And we're living with an eternal perspective. That's
right.
That's the big thing, that we shouldn't look at our life, even the everyday, mundane, ordinary situations, that they actually can have eternal value and eternal perspective. We should be looking at them, in the big picture and lesson.
Well, I was just going to say, then it's about a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, lesson 2 is about a relationship with Jesus, and that our intimate connection with Him, that, the analogy Scripture uses over and over again is marriage, that we're married to Christ, that actually gives us the power to change. We have the same power that raised Jesus from the dead at work in us, and I
just think that's super important. And I've got to keep watching myself on the language here, and I try and do it with people generally. If I hear everyone talking about it, that we don't just sort of start talking about we'll HPC that thing, or we'll. We just keep throwing out this idea of HPC as though it's kind of like a formula, or it's a
totally.
It really is about a relationship with Jesus. If you don't have a relationship with Jesus, then nothing of the rest of this is going to matter or work for you.
Yeah.
It's only through your relationship with Him that you're really going to be able to gospel yourself and take some of those sinful responses to the cross and figure them out.
And that's fantastic. Like spot on. the system and the framework won't work if you don't have an intimate relationship with Jesus, if you're not willing to process it through prayer and through fellowship and communion with him. Lesson 3, I think, in the introduction
this is big.
It's one of my favorites.
This is
and
huge. Yes, I agree.
I want to, just drive it home as being of key importance. It's called Change is a Community Project. And I think that this is one of the big things. Like, you could take this course or 100 other gospel, application things that are out there and just do it by yourself in isolation. And you might get a bit of value out of it. It might even be profound, but you won't get the value that you can get out of it to the bigger degree, to a continual thing, unless you're doing it in the context of community.
Yeah.
And
it's all predicated on the speck and the log principle, isn't it? That you can see someone else's sin far more clearly than you're going to be able to see your own. And so if you're in Christian community with other brothers and sisters in Christ, and that they're seeing how you respond to the heat in your life, then you might be missing what's going on, but they're not going to miss it. They're going to see it in all of its 2020 glory.
That's right.
And then that's a blessing to you, because they can get alongside you and be helping you to see the sinful response that's happening, but also to work through how the gospel means you can respond differently to that heat.
And for people who are involved in DNAs, this is the nurture element that we want to draw out, that, if you've got a blind spot, if you can't see something in your own heart and life, that's a safe, small community where you are able to do that and have people who know you, who love you, who you love and respect as well, being able to say, hey, can I just speak into that? And I think when you're talking about the language, I think what is so important for us to not say HPC, but gospel, because that's really what it is.
Right.
It's the truth and the power of the gospel. And so how can we gospel ourselves? How can we help gospel one another? And it's really, really important to see that. And so anyway, from there we kind of you work out.
You move into the heat, thorns, cross, fruit stuff.
That's right. And then you kind of have 2 lessons on each of those, unpacking it and seeking to apply it. There's a bunch of videos that are good. The fashion's a little outdated now because it was recorded a while ago, but the content is fantastic.
Yeah.
I think something else that's just, really important, you kind of touched on this when you were saying when we worked through it for the first time, is it sometimes takes time to settle in. What we've found is many people, kind of have a deeper revelation and understanding of how to work it in and apply it, not on round 1, but later on, further down the track.
Yeah. That's a very true thing. And so we encourage people to not just do it once, but if someone else in your group is going through HPC, be part of that and get to a point where you might be able to lead someone else through that. I mean, totally. That's the more people that we've got who can do that, the better it is. I've just remembered something else too about the course. There's a thing called a personal growth project. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the personal growth project is basically the idea that you take one single area of heat in your life and it's kind of like your initial working through the framework. So to seek to apply the gospel, you'll work through the heat, the thorns, the cross, the fruit, in all those areas. And I like to think of it now after being through this, and we must have been through, I don't even know, maybe near 20 times that Beck and I have worked through or led other people through how people change. I kind of like to think as the PGP is kind of like your first run at trying to work out how to use this tool for gospel application.
It usually is, yes.
And so it's not just this is my project and this is the one area of life that I'm going to work on and then leave it. As you get more and more familiar with this tool, like the first couple of times, you may need to work through the whole course or you may need to work through the book, but we would love to see people at Disciples Church get to a point where they can just kind of think about a sinful response, a thorny response, and be able to go, wow, what do I need to work through to help change that by the power of the gospel into a God-honoring response. And if I'm struggling to do that, who can I get to help me, work through that application?
Yeah. No, it's good. And the more you do that, the more proficient you can become at that. And rather than it just sort of being a step-by-step, step one, I've got to do this, step two, step three, it just starts to become, after a while, a bit second nature. And you're going, oh, man, I shouldn't have responded that way. And you can quickly go to the heart issues of what am I not trusting God with in this moment, or, whatever that issue might be in that particular instance. And then you're starting to look at new ways of responding that, as you say, are more God-honouring. So, all right, just for the sake of time, let's jump to what's our system here at Disciples Church? When would someone expect to be offered to go through How People Change?
So because we think this is such a fantastic resource, and the big ideas behind it are really something that lays at that idea of worship realignment that we talk about regularly, the idea of having your heart impacted by the gospel. It's something that we want people to grasp early on. So our aim is that when people become members at DC, that this is one of the things that their missional community group leaders will take them through as soon as possible. Generally, that happens fairly quickly. Sometimes in cases for a variety of reasons, it can take a little bit longer. But we want everyone who is a member at DC to not just have been through this, but to actually be familiar with the content and concepts that are in HPC. Because really, it's a deeper gospel awareness and understanding that we're trying to empower people with.
Yeah. I think there's a video, I think it's actually Tim Lane that does this one, and it's right at the end, which I think is why I like to do that, either 13th or 14th week
the conclusion
of
week.
it. And what he talks about there is, two things. One, counselling, and the other is culture. Yeah. And he says, whether we realise it or not, we are all counselling one another constantly. Mm-hmm. So the minute after church on a Sunday, you might say to someone, "Oh, how was your week?"
Yeah.
And they might say to you, "Well, I've had a terrible week. This has happened, and this has happened, and this has happened." The very next thing that you say coming out of your mouth is some form of counselling.
Yeah.
It might be great, it might be terrible, but you're either giving sympathy or you're trying to one-up them. Well, you should have seen my week. It was this, this, and this, or whatever. But we're constantly counselling one another, and we're talking about our issues, and we're talking about our problems.
Yeah.
The vision that Tim Lane puts out is, but what if the culture of church was such that we start gospeling one another?
Totally.
The moment, when we're having a conversation with one another, and someone says, "Well, my week's been terrible. It's this, and this, and then I blew up at this person, and I did, whatever."
Yeah.
That we can help that other person. This is the community element kicking in here at this point of understanding. Well, I'm going to give some counsel, but it's going to be gospel counsel here, and I'm not just going to give sympathy, or I'm not going to try and one up them, but I'm going to try and point them in the direction of Jesus, and help them see what they need to see out of this.
Yeah.
And if this is the culture that every conversation that's happening at DC after church or at your missional community group meetings and so forth, if that's the culture that we're creating, then more and more we're going to be encouraging one another to faithfully follow Jesus.
Totally.
To embrace the idea of the process of sanctification and letting the Holy Spirit have control of our hearts so that our behaviour does change.
Yeah.
And we end up being a transformed community as a result of that. And so exactly what you were saying there before, in order to try and foster that within our culture, to make sure that every member goes through this and everyone's kind of been exposed to this kind of teaching, we've decided as an eldership that that's really important.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of culture that we want to create.
Yeah.
And so hence, even though the resource has been around for a little while now, we're still using it because we think it's just got that value, for us.
A number of the culture experts that they've read speak about language helping create and form culture.
Right.
And I think that's just one of the things of having a familiarity across everyone who's a member that, like you were talking about, that example, if someone says, my boss has been a jerk this week and I'm really struggling to, not want to punch him in the face.
Yeah.
Then if I said...
Which, just so you know, is a thorny response.
Yes. But if you said that to me, that I could say, wow, that's some heat in your life.
Yeah.
How are you responding?
Yeah.
We want everyone to be familiar enough, and those of you that have done HPC more than once, hopefully that's triggering in your mind that when you have those conversations after church, that you can even ask that question, and someone goes, "Oh yeah, the gospel can actually impact my attitude with my boss at work, or my response to a speeding ticket, or to the difficulties I'm having at home, or whatever it is.
Whatever it might be. Exactly.
And there's countless ends, but you can actually say, that's call out that heat, those difficulties in a way that you can draw them out, and be able to gospel somebody through that, and even saying, hey, can I help you, apply the gospel to that? How do you think you're responding? What would the gospel say in that situation to help you move from thorns to fruit?
Exactly. So if someone's fairly new to DC and they end up in a missional community group, and then the leaders come to them and say, hey, do you want to do this thing called How People Change?
Yeah.
Our encouragement is...
Jump on it.
Jump on it
and dig into it.
And do it.
And if it doesn't kind of hit home the way that you hear the excitement in our voice about it straight away, don't just write it off. I think that's the danger that, like the way you can... you could approach this as pure content, and then it's just something that you're going to kind of get,
work through, tick the box.
That's right. But the reality is that it can be so much more that. And countless people that I know say second, third, even fourth time is when it really made sense.
Yeah, right.
And started to, sit in their head. Yeah, that's right. And then their ability to actually apply, the gospel into their lives at that deeper level by using the How People Change framework has just been able to increase from that. And it's when people get that and you see that happen, then they start to go on. There are a number of other good tools that we use around here at DC to help with the same thing, but this is just the key one. And as we said, if we're going to shape a culture like that, we need everyone to actually be on board. And so this is just a great place to start to be able to do that. Instruments, as you mentioned before, can kind of help to the next level. And, some people can work through that or look into that, read the book. Gospel fluency, the 4 Gs, they're all other things that we use. Yeah. But if we start with having all our members working through this early on in their discipleship journey, it's going to help just lay a platform for us to be a church that has a culture of giving good gospel advice as counsel, not just whatever the wind blows at us kind of advice.
I've been speaking to Pastor Anthony Sliger about a resource we use at Disciples Church called How People Change. We want to commend it to you. Sliger, thanks for chatting with us.
Pleasure.
If you'd like more information about what's going on at Disciples Church, check out our website or email us at podcast@disciples.org.au if you have any questions or feedback. Thanks for listening in. We'll catch you next time.